Now, I told you earlier that I have the head tax from PricewaterhouseCoopers and partner, Taiwo Idile, in the studio. Now, my first question to you is, did the reappointment of Godwin Emefiele, did it come to you as a surprise or were you expecting it?
Yeah, I think to some extent it was a surprise to me personally because the rumors that was going around was maybe the government wants to do something drastically different from what they did in the first term. But I think it's also to a large extent good news because if you look at the first term of 5 years for the CBN governor, it was a very difficult period. When Nigeria went into recession, we had crises with exchange rate, and Nigeria wasn't prepared for it. There were a few missteps, but overall, and given where we are today, I think the CBN governor did well, and it only just makes sense to allow Nigeria leverage on the experience it has gathered in the first 5 years for the next 5 years.
Now, let's look at it now. A lot of issues. Nigeria slipped into recession and we're able to wade through the challenges and all of that, tight monetary policies and all of that. Some analysts have been giving knocks talking about some of these policies, but I think some said it paid off at the end of the day. What do you make of some of the policies of the central bank?
Yeah, so if you look at the key indicators, inflation, exchange rate, foreign reserve, unemployment, you see that for some of them, say, inflation, for example, it's not been very bad. If you look at exchange rate, it's been stable now for almost 2 years. Like I said, at the initial stage of the crisis, it was difficult, and even the CBN was doing some trial and error, which didn't play out well. If you look at things like unemployment rates, if you look at stuff to do with, government and deficit, those ones are not very good. We will not put the blame entirely on the CBN. It will be something to do with government generally. But I'll say that given what we have gone through in the past 5 years, we need to now think very critically as to how do we ensure that we have inclusive growth that is higher than the growth in population so that we don't increase the level of poverty that we currently have. So the past 5 years may not have been great. What we expect will be that going forward it will be better. It could have been worse. So some credit should also go to the CBN and the CBN governor.
Indeed, my next question will be regards to interventions by the Apex Bank. Many have commended the Apex Bank for the Anchor Borrower Scheme, interventions for SMEs, creative sector, ICT, and all of that. Many said this has not been the case before now. What do you make of that?
Yeah, you're right. So those interventions are good, but I don't think that they are good enough in terms of scale. So if you look at Nigeria, you have millions of MSMEs, you have tens of millions of young people who cannot find employment. So when you have these interventions where you're able to help 1,000 people here, 5,000 there, it's good for those people that you're able to help, but in the larger scale of affairs of the economy, it's not very significant. So therefore, what we need to do now is to look for interventions that will be that we can scale, things that would affect tens of millions of Nigerian households so that we can begin to lift people out of poverty. We cannot continue with incremental progress and success. It's not going to get us anywhere. So we have to look for things that will be transformational, in my view. And that will be anything that will help us reduce unemployment rates significantly and help us address growth, such that we have growth that is not only just good for GDP measurement, but it's good for inclusive development, carrying all our people along.
Now, almost finally on this, before we move to the second topic of discuss, some also brought the argument of reducing the cost of borrowing. That is one issue that I got like 3-4 analysts harping on, that the central bank needs to work on that. How possible is that, considering our economy and all that we face at this time?
Yeah, I do agree. I think that we are too fixated, in my view, on controlling inflation, and we're almost doing a payoff with growth in the economy. I think ultimately, if I have to do a trade-off, I would say I'll go for economic growth. If you look at it very carefully, the fact that the CBN governor has now been nominated for the next term, another 5 years, the bond market was excited, right? But equity market wasn't excited. And this is also an indication that we need to think about. Now, what does it mean? Currently, if you invest in treasury bills and government bond, Your risk is very low. You make a lot of high returns. It's tax-free. And if you invest in real sector, equity to do manufacturing, to do services and all of that, it's pretty difficult. And so we have to get to a point where people who are doing real businesses make more money than people who are putting money aside for government by way of treasury bills and bonds. So this is one area where government needs to look into to reduce the borrowing cost so that people can actually borrow money to be able to invest to develop the economy. That has to happen like yesterday.
Indeed. Now let's move to issues around fiscal policy. Now, the budget, 2019 budget, is anchored on the economic recovery and growth plan, and so many have argued that this document looks too ambitious. I don't know if you are towing that line.
I wouldn't say it's too ambitious. It's always good to think big, but then you have to also be realistic with the implementation. So the document in itself, there was nothing that says that we wanted to accomplish or deliver on those outcomes in 1 year, in 2 years, or even in a couple of months. It was supposed to be a long-term plan, but then there are bits and pieces of it that you implement on a short-term basis. So far, I would say the government has taken some positive steps in trying to implement that policy. But sometimes you also find some actions of government that you really can't reconcile with that overall goal that we have developed for Nigeria. So the way we have to look at it is, if you have a vehicle, you have a car, you want the car to work and run and move around. So you can't focus only on just one aspect of it. Yeah. So you can't say, well, I'm the mechanical engineer and the engine is great. If the electrical work is not good, the car cannot move. If there's no fuel in the vehicle, it cannot move. If the tires are bad, it can move, but it will be heading towards an accident. So we have to ensure that even the ERGP, combined with the work that the CBN is doing around monetary policy and the Ministry of Finance around fiscal policy as well as trade policy, all of that have to work together in a very coherent manner. And there has to be some level of coordination between the federal government, the state government, and local government. As much as we expect there should be coordination and collaboration between the executive, the legislature, as well as the judiciary, everybody has to think about this one project called Nigeria, not acting in a disjointed manner.
Indeed, crude oil projections also stand same as what we have for 2019 in this figure that we have projected here, and also 305 naira to a dollar respectively. That's talking about the exchange rate. Do you see us sustaining this? There's been a little bit of stability in the forex market actually, but are we moving on with defending the naira? Are we getting it right?
I think there are a number of issues that we have to think differently this time around going forward. So even though the exchange rate of dollar to naira is 305, I think that we're at a point now where we have to just be very honest with ourselves. The exchange rate of naira to dollar is not 305, it's around 360. We need to harmonize it. Because take for instance, when Nigeria gets the euro bond, you get dollars you've borrowed, and then you start converting it at 305. And before we know it, you tell us you have exchange gains. What exchange gains do we have? We need to harmonize it. If you think about the volume of 2.3 million barrels per day, it's not far-fetched because it's not only just crude oil, it's also condensate. The price that we have now is somewhere around 60, 70, maybe thanks and no thanks to the US and Iran. But this is not something you can bank on. In the next 2 days, something else might happen, and then the price could go down. We have to, as a nation, start thinking about how can we start planning our economy on non-oil, relying on oil revenue that we cannot control the volume. Most times we cannot control the price. It's just not too good the way we should run our economy. But I would say in terms of the benchmark for 2019, both in terms of the 2.3 million barrels per day and the price at $60 per barrel, it's not far-fetched. With a little bit of hope and prayer, hopefully we can get to where we want to be.
Nigerians, we pray a lot. Now, this is part of the economic agenda, fighting corruption, insecurity, and fixing the economy. That has been on the front burner of this administration. Now, I want to ask you, looking at the GDP projection, these figures we see 3.01% compared to the 3.5% per year, with inflation projected to stay at 9.98%. Is this feasible?
No, it's feasible. I don't know whether it's something that we would actually be able to accomplish the way we are going about what we do. So 3 point something percent GDP growth rate. It's not what the rest of the world is saying. So you would even find, even within Nigeria, you may find a different projection from the CBN as opposed to what you have in the budget. And then IMF has their own projection as well as the World Bank. If we do 3%, it will be good, but we should actually be doing more than 3%, given that our population growth rate is somewhere around 3%. So that's not, too far-fetched in terms of what we should aim to accomplish. In terms of the inflation rate, it would be nice to get to a single digit. I don't think we are very far away from it, so we can aim to get to 9%. And even ultimately bring it lower than 9%, because you want the investing community, businesses, to be able to borrow at single digits. And it's by borrowing and doing businesses that we can create employment and grow the economy. So overall, it's possible, but we just have to do more than hope and prayer, like you said. To be able to get there, we need concrete economic plans.
Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, Head Tax at PricewaterhouseCoopers, thank you very much for your time on Business Nigeria today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.